everybody. Hello. Welcome on this beautiful Friday afternoon. I'm so happy to see so many of you here for our distinguished lecture. My name is Emily Dressler. I am an associate professor in the College of Public Health, and I'm the chair of our research committee for the college. I just wanted to make a quick note. There were flyers at the sign-in table. We have 5 other events this semester in addition to our talk this afternoon. And on October 6th, we'll have another distinguished lecture series about Zika and public health issues. So if you're interested in that, there will be flyers out by the door. Feel free to pick one up on your way out. I wanted to very quickly introduce Dr. Terry Bunn, who's going to come introduce our speaker. Dr. Bunn is an associate professor in the Department of Preventative Medicine and Environmental Health here at UK, and she is the director of the Kentucky Injury Prevention and Research Center, or KIPRIC, which was established in 1994 as a collaboration between the university and the Kentucky State Department of Health to integrate academic research and communities practice in the area of intentional and unintentional injuries. So with that, Terry's going to come introduce our speaker. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Emily. And nothing gives me greater pleasure than to introduce Debbie Hersman today, because she really embodies safety from all points of view, whether you're talking about worker safety, community safety. And she not only works in the area, she lives and breathes it every single day. So we are so happy to have her with us. And Debbie has quite a decorated career, starting in transportation safety. She started out in that area, actually, when she was a teenager. She soloed a Piper Tomahawk at the age of 17. She also has her commercial driver's license with endorsements for motorcycles, for school buses, and for passenger buses. And my only question is I didn't see one for watercraft or mopeds, you know. There's not much left to achieve as far as that goes with your driver's license. She's also fed her love and her passion for transportation from the beginning, because she started out in transportation safety as the senior advisor to the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce from 1999 to 2004, and was appointed as a board member of the National Transportation Safety Board beginning in 2004. She became the chair in 2009. But during her tenure before she became chair, she, well, unfortunately for us, was lead investigator for the NTSB following the Comair 5191 crash in 2006. So she's come to meet with many people here in the Lexington area on the investigation that occurred following the crash. She received an honorary UK degree from 2013 for her work on the NTSB investigation, an honorary doctorate, I should say. And she's now president and CEO of the National Safety Council. So she's able to realize all of her passions for work in safety, focusing in a number of different and various areas. National Safety Council works in the area of not only occupational safety, but also in drug overdose prevention, driver safety, fatigue prevention, falls among older adults, you name it, and they're working in the area, and they are leaders in the nation when it comes to safety and injury prevention. And in fact, she'll probably talk more about it, but I think their new mission for the National Safety Council is to reduce all preventable injuries. So I'm so happy to welcome Debbie today, and she's going to be talking to us today about 5 leadership lessons, how you learn from crashes, collapses, and chaos.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. You all seem really spread out back there, and I got to figure out where I'm supposed to stand so I don't stand right in that light. You know what? I'm going to have Rick roll a video real quick, and then we can get started. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about what Terry talked about. What does the National Safety Council do? Because I'm sure many of you have that question.
Join us.
Join us.
Together.
Together.
Together,
Together, we
can prevent injuries.
And save lives.
Thank you, Rick. I'll figure out how to drive this thing. Okay, thank you. So, how many of you all saw yourselves in that? I know we've got a lot of health and safety professionals here. Can I get a show of hands? So some of you are doing some of those things already. I'm going to try to make this interactive, and I know some of you are sitting in the back. I'm not going to make anybody come up to the front of the room, but I will try to encourage you to participate, and so I feel bad because I'm probably going to pick on the people in the front because I can see you better. I was just curious. I know many people have connections to the crash that occurred. So before I begin my talk, which is not going to be completely focused on 5191, but I will talk about it a bit. How many of you all are here because you have a personal connection or an interest in 5191? Okay. Thank you all for being here. And I just want to share with you in advance, I know that some of these discussions and some things that we talk about can be uncomfortable, and so it won't hurt my feelings at all if you're in a place that you want to get up and leave. But we're not going to be looking at anything that might be upsetting. I just wanted to make sure that people understood. I know this is a very sensitive time and a sensitive topic. So I thought I would share with you some really basic, and I'm not standing in the middle because then I'll stand in front of that light, but I'll probably move back and forth. Some basic things that I've learned over the course of my career working on safety issues. And some of them are going to be NTSB investigations, but others will be more generic issues. For those of you who do have that connection to 5191, I think each of these lessons, even though they may not be about the crash, you're going to see some things in there that will remind you about how when we see something like that occur, it's never one thing. And there are a lot of things that have to line up in order for something to go so tragically wrong. What do you see in this picture? Shout it out. Come on, this is interactive. Two faces. What else do you see? A vase or an urn. So some of you see a vase, some of you see faces, and some of you can see both things. So you all know that old adage about don't assume. Nobody laughed, so I'm not sure you know it. There is an old adage about don't assume. And one of the things that for sure in the investigative world, but also many of you have investigation as part of what you do. I know Terry does when you look at how things, we really try to trace things back. I know we've got law enforcement, we've got coroners, we've got people on there who have done many of these things. Sheriff Witt's in the back. And so I know many of you all know about what happens when we talk about assumptions. So let's talk about whether you're in the medical profession or whether you're doing something else. What are the challenges with assumptions? What's good about assumptions, but what's bad about assumptions? How about the good stuff? They're quick, right? So you have experience, you have knowledge, you've done something before, and so it's really just like almost human nature to be able to get those pathways. It's almost like muscle memory. If you've done something before, you've seen the markers, it helps you to assimilate things very quickly. It's almost like a survival tactic. If you were a caveman and you knew your friend had been eaten by the woolly mammoth at some other location, or the saber-toothed tiger, you wouldn't go there again, right? And so those pathways, you've done something before, you've seen something, you understand it, you can kind of move pretty quickly. What are some of the bad things about assumptions?
You don't know what the other person knows or doesn't know.
That's right. So Gary just said you don't always know what people know or what they don't know. So you're making assumptions about motivations, about knowledge, about experience, and you may or may not be right. What else?
You may not have all the evidence.
You may not have all the evidence, and so all of us are sometimes pressured to do things quickly, right? And so one of the problems when you do things quickly is you may not have all of the information. Any other kind of challenges? Yes, sir, in the back. Great. So that's sometimes people refer to that as things like confirmation bias. If you are looking for zebras, you'll start to see zebras, right? If you're looking for horses, you'll start to see horses. And so you start to shed things that don't support your hypothesis or your theory, and you don't ask the right questions because you're not open. You kind of have a sense that maybe you know what the answer is, and you start discounting information that doesn't conform to where you want to go, or you're not open. So this event here, the NTSB has to make decisions about which highway crashes they go to because highway crashes happen every day all across this country. This was a high visibility crash because some kids were killed on a school bus, and so it was a reason that we needed to go. When we first went to this crash and we showed up on scene, when do you think people wanted to know about what happened? Yes, they want to know immediately, and you guys know this because some of you, this has happened to you, right? And so people want to know immediately what happened. But this gentleman in the UK shirt said, sometimes you don't have all the evidence. And so I guarantee you, whenever you show up, whether it's for a workplace investigation, somebody gets hurt on the job, whether it's something that happens that's higher visibility, you will not have all of the information when you immediately arrive on scene. And so there's a tremendous time pressure. Either your boss or someone else wants to know what happened. In this one, I want to ask if anybody noticed what was underneath the school bus. That's a full-size pickup truck. So when we saw the pictures come back from this crash, we were looking at school buses. We didn't necessarily pay attention to the pickup truck that was underneath. The fatalities occurred on the school bus, and there was a young man in that pickup truck that was also killed. It took us 3 weeks to receive cell phone records about what the driver of the pickup truck was doing. In the 11 minutes before the crash, he sent and received 11 text messages. So he wasn't the only one at fault here. He was distracted. But what about the bus drivers? They probably were going too fast for conditions or following too closely as well. But that young man was actually the catalyst for the NTSB issuing a recommendation in 2011 to recommend that all cell phones, handheld or hands-free, be banned in the United States. I just walked across campus. I was at another building, and I'm totally not picking on any of Big Blue Nation here, but this is definitely something that you see wherever you go. But yesterday, there was somebody hit here on campus. When we talk about preventable injuries and we talk about preventable deaths, we want to think about everything that we do every day. And nobody has to confess, but when we get behind the wheel, that's one of the most dangerous things that we do in our lives. It's the leading cause of death for young people. But yet we take a cavalier approach to that because we think we've done it thousands of times and there hasn't been an incident and there hasn't been an event, and we get complacent. And certainly this young man was complacent, but he didn't intend to pay for that complacency with his life. I would urge you all, people worry about plane crashes. 49 people were killed 10 years ago. 100 people are killed every day in motor vehicle crashes in this country. That's like 2 Comairs going down every day. Why isn't our hair on fire about these deaths? Why don't we say we can prevent these deaths, and we should? There's more that we need to do. 10,000 people every year are killed in alcohol-impaired crashes. That is absolutely unacceptable. And did you know that we have technology, either ambient breath or a touchpad on your hand, that can stop a car from starting when someone's impaired, when they're at the legal limit? Why don't we all have that on our cars? As a society, we've become very complacent about some of these fatalities, and we need to understand that if we don't change what we're doing, we're going to continue to see them, and they're going to repeat themselves. Since 2011, no state has passed a law banning handheld or hands-free. 46 states ban texting, but it's not your hand that's distracted. It's your brain. If it was your hand, we would have outlawed stick-shift cars. Your brain is distracted, and that cognitive distraction keeps you from being attentive to what's going on the road. So my first lesson was don't assume. My second lesson is about getting sleep. And I see some people in the room who are wearing scrubs, and so I'm assuming that maybe you're in the medical profession, and I'm sure that you could school all of us in fatigue and in the importance of sleep. But we're human beings, and we're all biologically really programmed to sleep at night and be awake during the day. We're diurnal creatures. And so when we think about fitness for duty, about what makes us perform at our best, and we think about things like what do we do when employees show up for work? How do we assume that they're fit for duty? Well, we give people drug and alcohol tests, but the thing that's probably most likely going to affect people's performance is probably not getting enough sleep. 30% of the population has difficulty getting a good night's sleep. About 10% have sleep apnea. Other people have insomnia, medical conditions, or they take medications that may prevent them from getting a good night's sleep. So when we look at fatigue, do we really pay attention to how much sleep we get? And there's studies that are out that show if you get 2 hours less sleep than your normal sleep, so if you're an 8-hour sleeper and you get 6, or if you're a 7-hour sleeper and you get 5, or if you're a 6-hour sleeper and you get 4, it's the equivalent of a 0.05 BAC. We all know that we're crabby. We all know that we're short, and we don't make good decisions, and we're impatient with other people when we're really tired, but it's also a risk for us. And so whether you're behind the wheel or whether you're on the line at an assembly plant, not being well rested can be very dangerous. Just out of curiosity, how many people in this room got 8 or more hours of sleep last night? How about, how many people got less than 6? Oh, gosh. Okay. If you guys fall asleep during my speech, I won't feel bad. So this was a crash that occurred involving Fedex. Fedex is a cargo operation. This was a 3-person crew. They were flying from Memphis to Tallahassee in a 727. They had a pilot, or a captain, a first officer, and a flight engineer. They crashed short of the runway. All 3 people survived. Most of the damage to this aircraft is post-crash fire. The thing about people surviving events is you have the opportunity to interview them, you can talk to them, you can get more information. So in this investigation, we found some really interesting things. The first thing that people would be interested in is we found out that the first officer, who was the flying pilot at the time, was colorblind. So you all, particularly people who have an aviation background, would say, but you get screened. And you know what? He'd flown for the Navy before he was a commercial pilot. And he had passed through the Navy and the FAA batteries of tests, which do test for color blindness. But we knew that he was having trouble on the approach. He was having difficulty differentiating whether the airplane was too high or too low. There's some visual aids on the surface that pilots use when they're flying a manual approach. And we had him tested, and it turned out he was colorblind. And none of the tests before had picked that up. Well, we started to look, and we realized that the Air Force had discontinued the test that both the Navy and the FAA were using a decade earlier, because about a third of pilots who are colorblind would pass through that test. It wasn't effective at catching everyone who was colorblind. So that was an outcome where we were able to get the FAA to change the test that they used. But if we'd made assumptions and just said the pilots screwed up, they got too low, they dipped below the minimum decision altitude, and they shouldn't have, and they clipped trees short of the runway and crashed, we wouldn't have understood this and made this recommendation about all pilots. The captain, who's always responsible for the aircraft, also wasn't performing at his best. He had actually had the opportunity to get a night's sleep at home on the day before this, so he hadn't been out on a trip. But the family dog was dying, and he'd been out on trips in the days preceding. And guess what happened when he came home from being out? And his wife had been dealing with things while he'd been gone. What do you think she said? It's your turn. I heard some of the guys say it. So he came home from being out on trips, and his wife had been taking care of things at home, and she tapped out, and she said, you know, it's your turn to deal with this. The captain was not resentful. It was probably the last days that he was going to get to spend with a beloved family pet, and so he spent the night prior to the crash sleeping on the couch and waking up frequently during the night to take care of the dog and let the dog out. So he wasn't at his best, but he didn't necessarily have the ability to call in and mark off from duty fatigued. Most of us don't have that opportunity, and I'm looking whether it's medical or law enforcement or other folks. There are a lot of times where you haven't gotten the sleep that you need to get, but we often don't have policies that say, I'm really not fit for duty and I'm not in good shape to work. But all of us would rather have someone, whether it's a pilot, a doctor, or law enforcement who are taking care of us, be well rested when they show up. And I ask you to look in the mirror and kind of ask yourself the same question. Do you show up well rested? Do you show up prepared? And what can you do to take better care of yourself? 3,000 people are killed in drowsy driving crashes every year. And I'm sure that all of you can relate to experiences that I know I've had. You're sitting at a stoplight, and you just close your eyes for a second, and you open them, and you think, whoa, how long were my eyes closed? If you've ever hit rumble strips, if you've ever had to roll the window down and turn the radio up, you know how hard it is to fight sleep. Take care of yourselves. Okay, this is going to be a test. And I know university students and professors love tests. So I'm telling you in advance it's a test. So I'm sure all of you now have your antenna up and are trying to figure out what's going on and how you're going to ace this test. I'm going to show you one slide. And all I want you to do is read the text that's in the middle of the slide. There's a phrase, there's a statement, and just do one thing. Count how many times the letter F, as in Frank, appears. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to do it. Okay. So I heard somebody counting out loud, so I hope they were right, because if they weren't, they screwed everybody else up. So I'm going to ask you all to stand up. Everybody stand up. Okay. If you counted 5, 6, or 7 Fs, please take a seat. If you counted 8 Fs, please take a seat. If you counted 9 Fs, please take a seat. Okay. Chief Basson, I see you're still standing. How confident do you feel that you counted the right number? Gary, you're sitting down right next to him. How confident do you feel about how many you counted?
I feel very confident.
And what makes you feel so confident?
I trust him and put a lot of confidence.
No, you trust him, but what about you? Did you count right?
No, I wasn't right. I'm never good at this. I trust him. I think he's right.
Oh my gosh, the pressure of it all, Ronnie, the pressure. Okay. Terry, how about you? How come? What's going on here? You're a researcher. What do you think? Who's right? Are you right? You're sitting down. You got a PhD. You'll test everybody after we're done, huh? Okay, I think we're on 9. Is that right? If you counted 9 Fs, please take a seat. If you counted 10 Fs, please take a seat. Oh, it's starting. The drama's building. So look around. There aren't that many people standing. If you counted 11 Fs, please raise your hand if you're still standing. Okay, ma'am in the back, you didn't raise your hand. How many did you count? 12, okay. 11, it's 11. So I know you all are chomping at the bit to try to figure out where are those Fs. Okay, so many of you, probably like me, missed the ofs. They're little words. Sometimes when we're reading, we just skim over little words. They're insignificant. And if you're an oral person and you're listening for the F sound, an of doesn't really sound like an F. And so those were easy to miss, right? And I know some of you are still counting and not quite sure that we have 11. And I know there's always a know-it-all in the room, so go ahead, somebody who's like wants to disagree. I could see Gina pointing them out. Go ahead. There are some F's down here, and up here, but that wasn't following directions. I just told you to read this statement. Okay, so my question to you all is, this was a really simple task. You all have known what an F is since you were in kindergarten. And it was really easy, and we probably only had less than 10% success rate in this room. So who's responsible for the failure? Are you, or am I? Or are we both responsible? What do you think? Yeah, you guys are so nice in Lexington. I could do this somewhere else, and they'd all say, you are! So,
It was because the way I understood your instructions.
Yep.
Your instructions were not for the whole thing, but for the words in the middle.
yeah,
Is how I understood the
yeah,
instructions.
yep. So there are 11 in this statement. Yeah, if you count these, they're 14.
If you count the ones just in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So definitely there's challenges with communication. So let's just not talk about you all for right now. Let's talk about me. I'm the leader. I asked you to do something. How could I have set you up for more success? More time, right? So time pressure, that is a lot of things, but first it's stressful. And so you start to get anxious before I even turn the next slide, right? You start to get anxious because I told you didn't have a lot of time. Did everyone have a chance to actually get through the whole statement? Did some of you have a chance to double check it or get through it? No, probably not, right? I didn't really give you enough time to do that. So I could have given you more time. What else could I have done to create success in this exercise?
Highlight them just like they are there.
Yeah. So that would have been really easy. How many of you would have gotten 11? I know some of you might not still have gotten 11, but probably 90% instead of 10% would have gotten 11. And I could have color-coded these. I could have made them really pop out at you. I could have made them green, but if you're colorblind, that wouldn't have been helpful. So there's lots of things that I could have done visually. What else could I have done? Right, I could have coached you ahead of time. I could have explained the task and told you, these are risks. You don't want to make this same mistake. Here's some information to help you do this task better. What if I had gotten a computer to do this job? Do you think they would have counted the number of F's correctly? So there's just some things that human beings aren't as proficient at. Some things are, even though it's really simple, it was a difficult task given the time constraints and everything else. And so the point of this is to really help everyone understand in life we put pressure on people. We put time pressure on people. We tell people to hurry up. How many times have you made mistakes in simple things like cooking or doing something where you're feeling rushed and you leave something out, or an error of omission or an error of commission, right? Time can really put challenges in front of people. I could have led you all into this exercise and given you a lot better opportunity for success. You didn't have all the information before the task started about where the risks were, what was going on. And remember, I talked to you in the beginning, you can see some things that connect back to Flight 5191. When we talk about making mistakes. People make mistakes. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we keep them from making fatal errors? How do we set them up for success? We are human and we will make mistakes. Every single one of us, and gosh, I've probably made 5 of them just standing up here in front of you. But my life wasn't at risk. I made those mistakes. You all forgave me my misspoken word, if we're typing at our desk and our spell check catches it. But there's some things that people do, each of you do some things too, like getting behind the wheel, that are life and death things. And so it's about doing things correctly every time. So to err is human, and one of the things that we want to understand and think through is how do we create things that are error-proof. There are a lot of ways that we can help people be more successful. Sometimes it's better communication, helping people to understand something. And I think the challenge that we have is, I know I do this. I have 3 boys. And I often look at my husband and say, I can't believe that they did that. And I'm sure those of you who are laughing have kids yourselves. But there are often times that there are people that we work with and say, I can't believe they made that mistake. That was really stupid. And I think there's oftentimes we judge other people who've made errors, who are in high positions or may have done something that's resulted in an outcome. They made a mistake. People make mistakes. And I think all of us have to stop and understand, how did we get to that point? Because usually people aren't intending to harm themselves or others. And I think that judgment where we say, that was a stupid mistake. How could anybody have done that? Just remember the exercise that you just did. All I asked you to do was count the F's. That was really simple. And so when we think about our kids, our coworkers, people that we're watching from afar and say, how could anybody have done something that dumb? Just remember, it's because we're human beings and we make mistakes. My second to last lesson is that change is constant. And so in this lesson, many of you all probably take science classes. Who survives? What did Darwin say about survival? Who survives? That's right. Who said that? Yay! You go, girl. So it's things that adapt to change, right? So the clue was right up here. So change is constant, right? And so you have to adapt. And what does that mean? That means the NTSB had to adapt. The first slide that I showed you on distraction, in 2004 when I first came to the board, they issued me a pager. Do you guys remember pagers? In 2004, I had to be near a landline if I was on call, so I could call in and figure out what was going on and if I need to have a showtime to launch with a Go team. During the 10 years I was at the NTSB, a lot changed in the world. Digital technology was completely revolutionized. In that 10-year period, I went from receiving a pager when I came to the board. When I left, I had an iPhone. And that iPhone could take pictures, movies. I could send and receive emails. I could use it as a phone, and I could even use it as a flashlight. So there are so many things that changed. At the NTSB, we had standard operating procedures. They've been really consistent for many years. But guess what we had to add during that 10-year period? We had to add a standard process to issue preservation orders on cell phone records in every investigation, because that had to be part of what we did. The world changes. Things change. We have to adapt, and so certainly in the safety world, we have to pay attention to those things. So I'd like to share with you something that I know many people in the room might be familiar with if you're from the School of Public Health. The National Safety Council tracks unintentional deaths, and we've been doing this since the 1920s. And I'm just going to run you through a few decades, and I just want you to look at the trends that you see. So here in 1983, when I was a teenager, look at this huge peak. These are motor vehicle deaths for those of you in the back, and this is too much of an eye chart. Motor vehicle deaths, high all across our life, but really this huge peak in the early years of driving. So just take a look. Watch that red line over the decades and watch what happens to it. From 1,800 deaths Sorry, I got ahead of myself there. Okay, so motor vehicle crashes came down a lot, right? That spike really came down a lot. We reduced motor vehicle fatalities for young drivers over that 4-decade period by about 50%. What were some of the things that we did? Some of you have worked in this area. What were some of the big things that we did? Seatbelts, right? And so I remember during my lifetime, we went from not wearing seatbelts to wearing seatbelts. What else? Car seats, graduated driver's licensing. That is a huge, huge benefit when it comes to young drivers. Just because someone is able to take a driver's test and get their driver's license doesn't mean they're a good driver. They're not an experienced driver, and so they really need that graduated period to become a better driver, limiting the number of passengers who can ride in the car with them, having nighttime driving restrictions, those cell phone bans. Politicians don't have a problem putting the full ban on kids. They just don't want it to apply to themselves. And so most states do have cell phone bans for novice drivers, for young drivers. What else did we do? We did something. Airbags. We did something big on the behavioral side. We raised the drinking age. During this period, we went from 18 to 21 to buy alcohol in most states. We also lowered the legal limit for what constitutes impaired driving, too. So you can see those numbers coming down. Now I want you to look at these 4 decades and look at a different line. And I want you to see what we should have seen many years ago, but we didn't. This brownish, orangish line, depending on where you're sitting, that represents poisonings. When we think about poisonings, a lot of times people think about kids getting into something under the sink or in the garage. But poisonings are anything that we ingest that results in death or injury. So these are deaths. So look at the poisoning numbers. Look at that brownish-orange line. 83, 93, 2003, 2013. What was the data telling us for a long time? Since the 1990s, we have a problem, and the problem's getting bigger. Most of these poisonings, I know you all here probably know this, most of these poisonings are a result of what? Drug overdoses. Specifically, what kind of drugs? Opioids. Do you all know what opioids are? We did a survey, the National Safety Council did a survey of people and asked them if they'd taken opioids within the last 3 years. About 25% of respondents that took the survey said yes, they had taken opioids within the last 3 years. Later in the survey, we asked people if they'd ever taken the brand names of the opioids, Vicodin, OxyContin, Percocet. Guess what happened? 17% more said yes. They don't even know that the drugs that they're taking are opioids. The base formula of an opioid is the same as heroin. Highly addictive drugs. Unintentional overdoses. These are absolutely preventable. And I think I talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago who told me in Kentucky they call it hillbilly heroin. Too many lives are being taken. And so when we talk about change is constant, why didn't we see this change as it was developing and what was going on? Why didn't we understand in 1993 we were starting to see a big rise in consumption? And as the pharmaceuticals got very effective at marketing these drugs, it started affecting a lot more people. And these aren't just people who are taking the drugs, these are people who died from unintentional overdoses. This doesn't count all the people who are addicted and dealing with this. Change is constant. We've got to pay attention to the data, we've got to pay attention to the information, and we've got to understand what trends are happening in our world around us, and we've got to respond to them. We've got to act, not passively watch and wait. And my last lesson of the 5 is the one I want you to remember today. I do want you to get more sleep. I don't want you to assume. I want you to kind of think about change and how you can embrace it. And I want you to remember that to err is human. But most of all, if you don't remember anything else, I want you to remember that people matter. Tomorrow we're going to be looking back 10 years and looking forward because something significant happened in people's lives. And one of the collateral responsibilities as a board member at the National Transportation Safety Board is that you help with family assistance. We've got somebody setting the camera up back there. I'll just wait till you're done. You go ahead. It's okay. It's okay. I'm not trying to give you a hard time. This is just like a serious part of my speech, and so, okay. So 10 years ago, when I came to Lexington, 49 people had been killed and 1 person had been seriously injured. How many people do you think showed up at the Campbell house to find out what happened, to do the DNA identification, to claim the remains of the 49 people who were killed? How many people do you think showed up? Hundreds. Terry guessed 250, so that's a good guess. That's in the ballpark. So for every person that was lost, there were 5 people who dropped everything, who left their jobs, traveled from out of town, and stopped what they were doing because that person meant a lot to them. And I want you all to think about 5 people in your life that would drop everything to be by your side if something happened to you, and the 5 people that you would drop everything to be with them. Because the people at the Campbell house didn't get a chance to have that option to think about ahead of time. These deaths were unexpected, and they were out of turn. And we've talked about all of the risks that are out there. Each of you have people who are important in your life, and every day we think there's always tomorrow. We're always going to have another chance to call our mom, to check in with somebody that we care about, or to do the thing that we've been putting off for somebody important because there's all these other little things at work or in other places that need to get done. I just want to encourage you to think about what's important, what's really important in life. There are lots of people that we engage with that matter to us. There's lots of people who do things that make our lives richer. There's people who look out for our safety, and we don't even know who they are. Gina and Steve are up here. They're working on safe communities right here in Kentucky. This picture down here was at the 1-year memorial for the crash. And Chief Beatty, and I know Ronnie and probably some others are here, there are people who look out for our safety every day. This picture up here in the right was at the 5-year anniversary when this memorial was dedicated. And that's my friend Lois. Lois lost her husband in 51-91. Lois passed away a couple of years ago from cancer. I never knew Lois before that plane crashed. She was an amazing woman. This memorial represents 49 amazing people, and we're going to get to think about that again tomorrow. But for me, I've got this picture in the middle, and I don't want to leave you kind of on a maudlin note. This is our extended family in Kentucky that I get the chance to come back and see. And my mother-in-law is here. We call her Granny. And we're at Granny's favorite restaurant. I don't know if any of you recognize that background, but that's Frisch's. I'm not sure why it's Granny's favorite restaurant, but it is. And I am so grateful for all the wonderful people in my life, the extended people in my circle of my life. But when we think about the people who are closest to us, very often we put them last because we think they're always going to be there for us, that we need to do all these other things, and we'll get to them when we have time for it. So I would just encourage you, don't do that. You never know. There's always time to do those other things that aren't that important. But when you leave here, I hope you go give somebody a hug, you give somebody a call, you do the thing that you would do if they weren't here. Because one day they won't be here and you're going to wish you said it to them. So there's lots of life lessons. There's lots of lessons to be learned. I know you guys might have some questions, and maybe you came here expecting to hear a different talk. I hope I didn't disappoint you, but I do want to leave time for questions so that if you wanted to talk about something else or if you wanted to hear something else, that you would have the opportunity to ask those questions of me, if that's okay, Terry. And I think this is a small enough room that we could probably hear each other. So are there any questions that anybody might have? Yes, ma'am.
We noticed that the falls number was also climbing a lot in the
Yeah.
later decades. Is that a function of the aging population, or is there something else?
Sure, so that's a great question. So I'll let you guys look at this blue line here. So back in 1983, you can see the blue lines. I'm sorry, it's not blue, it's gray. It may be hard to see. It's this line right here, the gray line. Oh, you know what? It's supposed to be blue. Okay. All right, that confused me. Sorry about that. Okay, so you know what? It's miscolored here. So here's falls, 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 falls. Okay. So this is a great question because there's actually two reasons probably for this. And I'm not sure, it's like motor vehicle crashes. We can't quite tease it all out, but we have some pretty good theories. Do you know what they might be? Because you asked the question. Is this something? Sure. Yeah. Yes, these are absolutes. Yes. So we have an aging population, and we're living longer, right? So as our life expectancy increases, we're going to have more of those older years, and so our numerator, or our denominator's bigger, and so we have more exposure. But there's also something else that happened that had to do more with how we report these numbers. And I suspect that that's probably one of the bigger factors in the jump, even though the number of people is older. We used to just report when people passed away, the proximate cause. What was the immediate thing that caused them to die? And so now we're actually getting a little bit better so that our medical examiners and our coroners are starting to trace things back. And sometimes, and I can give you an example, you have a otherwise healthy older adult. And the reason why this disproportionately affects older adults is because they're more frail and have kind of more severe outcomes with respect to falls. My kids used to be able to fall down concrete stairs and they'd get right back up like they're made of silly putty or something. I mean, and I could fall down and I'd be bruised, but I'd get back up. But it's a different story if somebody older falls down. They're going to have more severe outcomes. So somebody otherwise healthy takes a fall, breaks a hip, ends up in the hospital for that, and then maybe ends up in rehab, contracts pneumonia, and passes away. Before they used to say they died of pneumonia. But that person wouldn't have necessarily contracted pneumonia if they hadn't had that fall that precipitated the hospital stay that, with their compromised immune system, resulted in the pneumonia killing them. And so we're getting a lot better about understanding how did this actually trigger this death? How did this fatality occur? And so I'm not sure that we know all of the reasons why this number is changing so much, but it is definitely one of the things that people focus on with respect to safe communities and injury prevention. And we see the top three killers being motor vehicle crashes, opioid overdoses, and falls as far as unintentional injury deaths. Yes, sir.
I noticed a similar trend in deaths by suffocation within the first few years of
Yeah.
life. Do you all have a justification or a hypothesis why that occurred?
Yep, so you can see these numbers are looking really big with respect to suffocation, and we didn't necessarily see those high numbers before. There's been a lot of work to try to keep things out of the cribs with children, keeping blankets, keeping the crib bumpers out, keeping the wires. A lot of parents now have monitors, baby monitors, where they're watching their child. It can either be audio or video. There's been efforts to try to, if a baby's by a window and there's window shades, that pull cords, kids can get caught up in those. There's been a lot of efforts to try to address these things, but I do think that some of it may be associated with better reporting, but it is a very disturbing trend, and this is generally it's manual suffocation. We also look at co-sleeping, people who sleep in the same bed with their baby. That also has some of those risks there too, but I'm not sure that we know all the answers. This is data, and so you really have to look at each of the reports to begin to understand why. But there's a lot of things that have changed in this arena, but these numbers show us we haven't done enough. Gary?
How do you feel about children's deaths, children being in automobiles and left there? They're prosecuting that now in a different way than it was okay back many years ago. Compare that to cohabitating with your child, and we've got a lot of information out there. There's a lot of technology. There's educational information that's been supplied to the parents since mom was pregnant, practically.
Yeah.
And then mom and dad, or one or the other, sleeps with the child, rolls over, suffocates the child. How do you feel those deaths should be looked at now, since education has really helped us with many other factors, including car deaths?
Yeah. So we actually had kind of a bad year for deaths in hot cars this year, and this is not a National Safety Council policy. We don't necessarily have a policy on the prosecution issues. If somebody does something intentionally, and I think law enforcement has a role to play there. If somebody does something intentionally, absolutely, I think you have to prosecute them to the fullest extent you can. But I would say in many cases, and I know some parents who've done this, they're survivor advocates for us to help educate people on this issue. They didn't mean to leave their baby in the car. And they've already suffered the worst punishment that any parent could experience. It's horrifying. And I suspect that parents who are co-sleeping, with their children certainly don't mean to kill them either. But I would say that we've got to get people to kind of have the right kind of education and the right kind of information, because there is conflicting information out about co-sleeping. I think pediatricians work very hard to try to dispel some of that. But I think there's situations that are very sad, and I would say a parent being responsible for the death of their own child is probably one of the worst things that I can imagine. I don't think prosecuting some of the parents that leave their kids in the hot cars is actually the solution, because they'd never do it again. You're not really stopping them from committing the same act. And I think other parents watch that and they think, I would never do that. I wouldn't do that. But you know what? Nobody thinks they're going to do these things. Nobody thinks they're going to be the distracted driver that kills somebody. Nobody thinks they're going to be the one that leaves their kid in the car. I don't think people intentionally are doing some of these things, and I'm not sure that in this case that the criminal punishment is actually the deterrent that's going to stop other parents. We have seen some promising technology. I work with some of the auto manufacturers, and they now have installed some alerts in cars so that you can tell, just like many of you know in your front passenger seat, you can tell if there's weight on the seat. Ladies, if you put your purse over there, it'll tell you the airbag's off. So they can use that same kind of technology to remind you that you still have a baby in the back seat, like to alert you to ding. But some of it's just really simple. I mean, we tell parents, you don't have to have that technology. Just take your left shoe off and put it in the back seat when you put your baby back there. You're not going to get very far with one shoe. Put your cell phone or something else that's important to you that you would realize, hey, I don't have it. put it back there because we've seen that most of the time when parents make these mistakes, they're out of their routine. They had some sort of thing where they knew what they did every day. They dropped the kid off, and that's the day that they had the dentist appointment or they had something else, and they weren't following their normal pattern. But I think we've also seen some cases where there might have been some intentional behavior, and that's pretty disturbing. Yes, ma'am.
Does the National Safety Council track accidental deaths by firearms? Have you tracked it over?
So I would say we probably have that data in our injury facts, but I don't know it off the top of my head if you have a specific question about that.
I was just curious because of just policy decisions about in certain states, physicians not being able to advise parents about
Storage. Yeah, so we do have a position on safe handling, safe storage, and so we've had that on the books for probably since the 70s or the 80s, and so we've taken a position on safe storage, and I would say it's probably similar to the pediatricians, the American Academy of Pediatricians position on it. I saw one more question in the back, yes?
Looking at your charts, how it changed from the drinking was really high, and then when you changed the laws of the drinking, your drug overdose went up.
Yeah.
So if you find a direct correlation, because you fixed one problem, it just made the other one escalate, and if you fix the drug problem, something is going to take its place, because people just want to get high, and to remove one source, they'll find another.
So alcohol is not illegal. I mean, people can still purchase alcohol, and so that source is still there for folks. I would say the one thing that changed is we used to have about 50% of our fatalities were alcohol-involved crashes. Now we have 30% of our fatalities are alcohol-involved crashes. And so that just, what that means is we're still killing 10,000 people every year, which is a huge number, but as a proportion of the deaths, it's gone down. And I'd say there's some other things that probably have impacted that, seatbelt use and other things that have saved people's lives. And so alcohol is still a really big problem. And I'd say 50% of the tests after a crash, if they're testing for alcohol and drugs, many states don't test for drugs because once they get the positive on alcohol, they don't need to go further because they can get a cause or conviction that way. But of the ones that did test for drugs, 50% of the fatals that were tested showed positive for alcohol and drugs. And so people are often using them in combination. I would say when you talk about diversion, one place where we have definitely seen this is the opioids. So if you have a crackdown on a pill mill or you have a crackdown on a physician that is prescribing inappropriately, they will turn to other sources. And we know when things tighten up on opioids, we're starting to see more heroin deaths in those communities. And so if you're an addict and you get cut off from your source, you still need those drugs. And so we know that heroin is easily available and cheaper. So if you're trying to buy prescription painkillers on the street, it can be more expensive. It's cheaper to buy heroin, and so often people make that transition to heroin. So there is diversion in some areas, but I wouldn't say it's from alcohol to drugs. We're seeing a lot more positives on marijuana with states legalizing or allowing marijuana to be used for medical purposes or allowing it to be used for recreational purposes. So we're seeing some hits in those states like Washington and Oregon. I think some of the data starting to come in. The biggest problem is we don't have a test that we agree on for marijuana. We don't have a roadside test like we do a breathalyzer. And we also don't have cutoff limits that are national standards. We know on blood alcohol it's 0.08. That's our standard for cutoff. But on marijuana, there's a lack of agreement about what we're measuring. Is it THC? There's a lot of challenges, and we don't have consistency. So I would say that's another area where we have some problems. We certainly should be having mandatory testing for marijuana if we have states that are allowing people to smoke it. And we should have cutoffs to say what's impairing when you get behind the wheel. Most people don't know. Depending on how you ingest it, you can have very different kind of outcomes. So if you smoke it, you have a spike quickly. But if you eat it, you don't have your spike until later. And so some of you all who are in the medical profession know that probably there have been a lot of people who have come into ERs that are sick because they eat the first brownie and they don't think they're feeling anything because it takes a little while for it to kind of come through your system. So then they eat another one, and then by the time they're done eating, they're really not feeling very well. And so this is a problem for kids too, because a lot of these marijuana edibles are being packaged as gummies and candies and sweets. And so we're seeing a lot of problems with kids ingesting things that they don't realize have drugs in them. Thank you all. Oh, one last question.
Well, it's actually not a question, actually.
Yeah.
Since time is almost up and people matter, I didn't want you to leave without understanding how much this community appreciates you and the work you did with the competent and compassionate handling of that NTSB investigation here. I was a nurse here at the time and, of course, a citizen of Lexington, and I think everybody knew somebody who was here. When I walked in, it occurred to me that in my lifetime there's probably been two women who have offered an amazing amount of comfort to communities. And one was Jackie Kennedy right after President Kennedy was assassinated, and the other one was you. So we really appreciate your efforts. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't feel like I should even say anything after that. Thank you so much. That was awfully kind. I think I'll probably remember that for my whole life. That was very nice. Thank you. Could I ask Terry and Emily to come up? I just want to say thank you to you. And I'd put us in the middle of the stage, but you'll be blinded by the light. I just want to say thanks. There are so many people every day who make a difference. They work really hard to try to look out for other people and do the right things. And sometimes it's hard to do the right things. I just want to present to Emily and to Terry to say on behalf of the National Safety Council, thank you for everything you do here at UK and leading KIPRC. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Do I turn it back over to you all? Yeah, thank you.